Hello and welcome to the Dysfunction. I am Spencer. Most people call me Dopamine Dysfunctional. This week I have a very special guest. My friend Michael has come to join me. Most people know you on TikTok as ADHD Druids, right? The Druids is connected to the D, right? I always want to put
Yes.
ADHD and then say Druids, but it's
Yeah.
ADHD
Druids.
Druids, yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm glad I got that right. Now, Michael, we have been friends on TikTok. I mean, it's got to be like close to 10 months now, going back
Yeah.
way back before either of us kind of really knew what we were doing on the app, right? Like, it was great to connect. Like, both of us were looking for just people to talk to about being neurodivergent. So one night, late at night, we just got to chatting. And we talked for hours actually, and we
Yeah.
encouraged each other to make videos and really engaged. And from there, a friendship developed, and we got into planning a D&D session. And since then, we both kind of gone and done crazy things and haven't had a chance to connect. So forgive most of my viewers out here if a lot of this is just me catching up because
Hey.
I feel like as neurodivergent people we don't make a lot of time to do this, so let's get it in. So let's start from that point because a lot of things in your life has changed, like right around that time
Yeah.
you were looking into an ASD diagnosis. I know you have ADHD as well. Do you want to talk about some comorbidities and talk about since that time how you've been experiencing them?
Yeah. I did formally get diagnosed autistic. Man, yeah, that was a while ago. Because it was around this time last year that I think I formally got diagnosed autistic. It's weird. I remember the month in of my ADHD diagnosis, but I don't remember the month of my autistic diagnosis because I think it was a bigger impact on me
Right.
than ADHD. Because I think ADHD, I had some kind of like back in the mind thought that I like had always been ADHD, but I never knew enough about it to like really understand what that meant. And so when I finally got that diagnosis, it was a relief, but it was just more of like, oh, now I can understand better. The autistic diagnosis was like, I guess, more blindsided, more unaware, and it was kind of a bigger shock to my system of like, I do that? Like, I do these things? Like, this is something that I actually do? Like, I remember uh, during one of the assessments because I took they had me do fill out the like three or four different assessments, and one of them was like a take home. Part of it was I had to fill it out myself, and the other part was I had to fill it out with someone that was close to me that could like give their perspective of my behaviors.
Right, that's a very important part of the
Yeah.
diagnostic process, yeah.
And I just remember like we were going through it, and one of it was like uh tending to only be able to talk about a specific topic over and over, like, and tends to kind of control conversation around certain like specific topics or has difficulty changing topics. I didn't know I did that, you know
Right.
and
Well, it's not like
and
people
there,
are making signs like, hey, look out for this while you talk, right?
yeah, I like, and like when the person that was helping me with it was like, yeah, you do this a lot actually. And I'm like, it just was like, what? And like, it hit me in a way that was kind of overwhelming. Like, I think at one point I know I cried. I was just like, just, it was just like, oh man, this is whole uncharted territory. And I don't know, like, I think even as a content creator, like I focus mostly on ADHD, um, because in the past it's been kind of like this. I don't know, like I can't really. It's hard to explain it's harder to talk about my autistic diagnosis than it is my ADHD diagnosis.
Sure.
And it's not like a shame or feeling bad or anything like that. It's just I think it's I don't have as strong of a grasp of understanding of it as I do ADHD, and like maybe I haven't fully processed it. You know?
Sure. Oh yeah, that's absolutely fair, right? Like I'm a year into my ADHD diagnosis, and I don't think I have a firm grasp around that, right? So.
Yeah.
It was I remember because you brought it up when we were planning our D&D session. It was the day that you got your diagnosis, and you mentioned it in a very small group.
Yeah.
And just thinking back on that, like it was very interesting to me because since that time, there's been a lot of creators who have gone through this kind of diagnostic journey
Yeah.
and self evaluation. But you were really the first one that I knew that to experience that, right? So for me, like when I think about an ADHD person exploring an autism diagnosis, you're the first person that comes to mind for me because like you're the first exposure that I've had to it. So I
Yeah.
like I think it's well, first, I want to get your opinion on first being one of the first people that has gone through that process while being a creator here on TikTok, like or on any kind of social media, right? Like this has been a pretty well documented journey for you. Like that's one of the great things about this is we've seen you go
Yeah.
through some awesome things. So
Yeah.
why don't you talk a little bit about that? So I stopped talking.
No, you're fine. It's it's a unique experience because, you know, getting any form of diagnosis like neurodivergent, any neurodivergency diagnosis, it's, it is life changing. And even like as like an ADHD coach and like talking to people and as a content creator and educating and like helping other people discover themselves, you know, it's like I'm also taking that journey, and I think that's what's really great about it is not only am I helping other people, but I'm experiencing the same thing that I'm helping them with. And like, so it's like I know, like, because I'm in the trenches with people, I'm in the trenches,
Absolutely.
exploring these things, and I'm making the same mistakes, or I'm having similar emotional responses, and just being like, you know, like this is a real thing, and like it helps connect with other people, and it helps people connect with me, uh, in that, and it's like I don't know, it's you know going through similar experiences, especially in the divergent community, like really helps us kind of like bond and
Absolutely.
find that community and
Absolutely.
find our place in the world, so we can, exist as ourselves authentically. And that's has been like the greatest thing about it. Like, it has been a very emotional journey, and it is for everyone, but you know, getting to that path of like now I know who I am as authentically as I possibly can, and I can work towards being that person and being my true self without that fear or that shame or just like trepidation of
Ah, it's a
being
great
human.
word for it. Great word
Yeah.
for it. I couldn't agree more, and I love it. And one of the things about it is it takes a certain level of vulnerability, right, to
Yeah.
make that connection, right? And that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand. Like, a lot of people look at my ADHD tags being time video, and in that video I cry, and I had somebody say like, how can you be that vulnerable? And I'm always saying like, well, the people who reached out from that video, the friends I've made, the connections I've made from being vulnerable, is what has plugged me in to the community. It's what's made me authentic. It's what's kind of connected me and made me honest to everybody else, right? And I know you've experienced the same thing because you have shared some extreme hardships live on air, right?
Yeah. It's been a very cathartic experience because it's like I can be me and I'm going to connect with other people. And it's just, I don't know, it's liberating.
Yeah.
Cause like, especially like, I mean, growing up in a military household, you know, and my family wasn't very like constrictive of me being an individual, but there has been points in my life where that was something that like I had was suppressed. Like I remember, my dad was like tired of the type of clothing that I wanted to wear, and so he went out and like bought me a bunch of clothes and like forced me to wear it, and it was like the most horrendous clothing,
Right.
and like so I going through literal like identity suppression throughout life and then finding community and finding who I am and being able to express myself, has been such a blessing. And that's essentially why I do what I do as well, because I want other people to have that space, have that
Yeah.
opportunity to truly express themselves, because I know I'm not the only one that's experienced that. And, you know, as neurodivergent people, we always have to suppress ourselves,
Yeah.
and TikTok has allowed us to kind of create our own little bubble in this world and be like, you know what,
Right.
we're just gonna be us, and like if you can't accept us, too bad.
Right. I love it because it's a place where we actually get to define our own neurodivergencies, right? Like
Hmm.
there's the DSM, which is great, and there's all kinds of diagnostic things in there, but there's so many subtleties, and so much nuance into this that you don't really get until you see somebody who's experiencing that talk about it. That's what this is. Like when you
Yeah.
say a bubble, you're exactly right. Like because we glom onto each other, right? Like we grab
Yeah.
onto as many people as we can, because that's what this community is about. So tell me more about what the community means to you, because this gets me so excited. Like,
um Community means to me is, in a way, like, I hesitant to say the word, but like freedom, you know, not the good old American freedom, but just like being truly free,
right,
as an individual. Um, because we experience so much in our lives that tell us that we're wrong, or we should do this or we should do that, or like just kind of control our existence. And the community has allowed me to kind of define my own existence. I can work within the realm of society to be who I am, and I can be more comfortable with the choices that I make for myself. And that community has allowed me to have that support in knowing that it's the right thing to do. I like just seeing all the different creators and people that experience the same things I do, and each one of us are so unique,
mm-hmm.
you know like with you and like how you present yourself and just like the mad chaos, like
Right,
almost like a mad scientist in his like dopamine lab
right.
of just
I love it. I love that imagery. Absolutely, I'll
yeah.
accept that all day.
Yeah, it's like your sink is your table.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes I
Eh,
feel like that, and you're exactly right. Like that, I can be that person here, right?
yeah.
It's so much in my life I've tried to hide that dysfunctional person from everybody. So when I get to be here, it is more Sometimes I lean into it too much, I think. Like, honestly, like, full disclosure, I probably do it too much because it's like that's not me all the time, right? Like, but it's a
Oh
good
yeah.
mixture. But when I get off of work and I want to take, my suit off and stuff, like that's who I want to be. I don't want to be the professional, clean cut, responsible person. I want to be the chaotic person who is allowed to not to have everything put together and presentable,
Yeah.
right? Like, and
Well, yeah,
that's
because I
what
mean,
we get to be here.
I like the acceptance of just like being authentic. Like, that is the greatest thing because like we are not all put together people. We're humans, we are able to be flawed. We're able to be disorganized. We're able to exist in our space as we want to be. Like, do we like? Yeah, there are certain limitations. Like, you want to be hygienic. You want to be, like making sure that you're safe and not harming yourself or others. But as long as those things exist, it doesn't matter what it looks like.
Right.
Because like
Absolutely.
my room right now is a mess. It's a chaos. Like, but it's not. It's hygienic. It's I need a vacuum.
Right.
Like, but that's I needed a vacuum for the past month. But it's like I'm not living in filth or anything like that. And you know and that's what the community is about. Is like, what, sometimes it's okay to just live in a little bit of chaos.
Yep.
Sometimes it's okay to just say fuck it.
Right.
you know
Absolutely.
and we do our best to exist. Like, we shouldn't like restrain ourselves so much, because like we have that one life. It's that our existence is right now. We need to be in the present.
Perfectly said.
And I'm all about like living up to your own expectations, not other people's
Yeah.
expectations.
Yeah, that's huge, right? Like that's
Yeah.
there's so much internalized guilt and shame I have in my life
Yeah.
simply because other people expected things of me that I didn't
Yeah.
live up to, right? It's a little
Yeah.
ridiculous if you think about it. I don't even know those people anymore. Still carry
Yeah,
that
like,
guilt and shame though.
and I mean, even just me doing what I'm doing now and like moving to California and things like that, like I've gotten a bit of backlash from like some family, or just like, my parents are, they're doing their best to be supportive, but like, my dad was like, like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Like, it's really expensive out there. I'm like, I know.
Right.
Like, and or like, well, if you don't make it, you can always come back. I'm like, yeah, like I get that sentiment, like, to me, but like I'd much rather you just say, hey, you know I'm proud of you, good luck.
Right.
don't don't even play into the possibility of failure.
Right. Yeah.
Well, if you don't make it, you're always welcome back. Like, I already know that.
Right.
you
Sometimes you
know
don't want a fallback plan too, you
yeah,
know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah. Like, my thing is like, I'm gonna make it regardless. I'd much rather go homeless than have to move back to Kentucky. Like,
Right.
that's me. Like, that's who I am. And like, um, and they're being parents, but then I've had some family like, well, like my brother. He was like, well, I just moved closer to family because he's in military, so he's been all around, and he finally got a stationed about 6 hours away from where I used to live. And he's like, well, I just got, was able to move closer to family, and then you take off to California. I'm like, yeah, because it's what I want to do.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
he's like, and we kind of got into it a little bit, but I have no guilt. In the past, I might have felt guilty.
Sure.
You
Oh
know,
yeah.
uh, uh, but it's
Family guilt. Like you're getting into some deep guilt
yeah,
right there.
like, like, and that's the liberation that I've been feeling is like, what, family's human. The people around us, they're all human. They have their own perceptions of how things should be, and that's okay. I'm not going to try to change their mind. I'm just going to exist how I want to exist. I'm going to interact with the world how I want to interact with the world. And if people want to be a part of that, then they can show up, you know? But if they want to show up and try to shame me for how I'm interacting with the world,
Right.
because they just don't agree with it, just I don't need you. Like, and
Bottom
you
line,
know,
right?
yeah, and being neurodivergent, like being autistic, being ADHD, we're racked with so much guilt and shame as it is. Like, you know, finding our peace is the most important thing.
It's huge, right? And it's so hard to do, especially right. You've talked about expectations put on. That's exactly what we're going through. Like when you have other people who say this is how you're supposed to be living, right? But
Yeah,
your brain doesn't function the way their brain works.
yeah,
Like, how is that fair, right? Like, it reminds me of the old cartoon where the bunch of animals are lined up and the guy says, all right, everybody climb the tree, and the fish is sitting there like, what the fuck, right? Like,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
It's,
yeah.
you're exactly right. Other people's expectations. And so I want to talk about risk, right? Because you have taken huge risk, and I love it. I'm a huge fan of it. If you guys haven't heard me talk about it on TikTok, like I feel like we're at a deficit simply from like ADHD tax and things like that. That we have to take larger risks in our life to make up for that, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to know, like, what led you to jump? What led you to move across the country? What led you to get into coaching and actually turn your understanding into helping people? Like, what was that journey? Like, oh, I want to know so much. Okay, all right, I'm gonna be quiet. I'm gonna let you talk.
Yeah, it's kind of a long-ish story, I guess. So last year, end of January, I burnt out bad. Like I crashed hard. I was working as loss prevention for a retail store. I've been doing retail for 15 years. I've did TSA. I did so many different jobs. And was successful in a lot of them to some degree, but with always, same ADHD story of a lot of people is hopping, getting fired or quitting, or being not being fully satisfied. And when COVID hit and I had to go back to work, my position changed. Was still loss prevention, but because of COVID, I was restricted to basically being a glorified door greeter, and it was painful, to be there. So it got to the point where I couldn't go back to work, and so I quit. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I just couldn't do it
Yeah,
anymore. And I was like, I can't go back to a normal job. Like it just couldn't do it. And I was very fortunate enough to where like I was living with my parents on their property, like in a little tiny house. I had some money, you know, in reserve to kind of coast for a little while. Um, did not plan to coast as long as I did. So things started getting real tight. Um, when I met someone that lived in San Diego, and we started dating. I came here and I visited her, stayed a week and a half. It was an amazing time, and like I fell in love with the city. Like I almost didn't leave because I wanted to stay in San Diego.
right.
Like it was just it
Beautiful
felt
place.
it felt so good to be here. And when I came back, like the relationship kind of fell apart. Um, Other social things happened, like pre-autistic diagnosis that also kind of helped push the autistic diagnosis. Um, and I started content creating on this account because I did have an account before this, but I was mostly doing like cosplay
Right.
content, storytelling, nothing that had to do with neurodivergency. And I was like, I really want a space to where I can just like be me, and that's why started the 88 Druids. And one thing just kind of fell into place after the other. Like my account started growing. I started getting really passionate about like educating.
Yeah, you
I
did.
started take,
Yeah,
you
you did.
know, I got certified as a peer support specialist, which predominantly focuses on like addiction and things like that, but like peer support can apply to anything really. And I started using that knowledge and applied it towards ADHD and like helping others and with educating. And I was literally in a live stream, and I was like, my lives on TikTok were really busy at that time, and like I was getting people coming in asking me questions all the time. I would have like 30, 40 people just constantly asking me questions. I'm like, man, like, people are really resonating. I'm helping a lot of people. And I just in my live, I was like, what do you all think if I just became an ADHD coach? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm an ADHD coach now. That was just like, I'm an ADHD coach. And literally the next day, I was like, I started the business.
Nice. I love it.
And so I started that. Came back to LA and San Diego to visit for an event. And while I was in San Diego, I had this kind of like pull of, if I leave San Diego, I'm not coming back. And I was like, I don't like that feeling. Like like if I leave right now, I'm not coming back, and that's not a good thing. I don't like that. So, no plan again. I stayed in San Diego, reached out to my community, was like, "Hey, I need a place to stay or something while I'm looking for an apartment." I had some people reach out. I stayed on a couch of a stranger of a stranger, you know, and met some cool people. I spent an extra week in San Diego, looked at a few places, found the one I'm living at now, and put the deposit down. And I had to make the money that week too. I didn't have the money. I didn't know how I was going to do it, right? I was like, I don't have the money. I don't have a place to stay. I don't know how long this is going to take for me to actually find a place, you know? And I did it all in a week.
Wow. Talk about pressure, right?
Yeah. And went home, packed my stuff up in my car, as much stuff as I could, in my little car, packed my dog, and been here since last September. And it's been a bumpy journey. Like, it's not as, you know, like it's some months I'm like, am I gonna eat?
Right. Sure.
But it's getting a lot better. It's improving. It's
Awesome.
moving in the direction that I want it to go, and um, honestly, I couldn't be happier. Getting out of Kentucky has been probably the best choice for myself
That's
that I
fantastic.
can
I
make.
love hearing it. Like, congratulations. Like, talk about major risk, right? Like, I love it.
Yeah,
Like, and I think it's gonna pay off in spades for you. Like, that's what all this is about, right? Like, the
yeah,
the whole point of life is not to just stay in one spot and be complacent, right? Like, you
yeah,
get some serious growth when you get out and start traveling the world and trying new things, right? Like, that's incredible. You talked about getting big on TikTok in there, and we were going to talk about this. If you didn't, you're foolish. So let's talk about the video that kind of launched you into the stratosphere, right? Like the narcissism and ADHD, like the comparison there. That's all the setup I'm going to give. Like, I'll let you kind of talk about that video.
yeah. That video, that video is actually my second largest video. But it's probably the one that most people know me for. The one that started it all, started everything, was I just did a stitch reply to a guy that was like, as a neurotypical, what are some things about ADHD do we need to know? And I was just like, here's some things about ADHD that you should know. And that got 1.3 million views. I was like,
Easy
okay.
peasy.
Yeah.
No big deal there.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is new. Um, all right. And then I started getting videos hitting like 200,000 views or 300,000 views or, and like, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And then the ADHD and narcissism. And I think that one's sitting around 800 or 900,000. But it's cycled a couple times. And it's been one I think a lot of people resonated with, because as ADHD people, we are often victims from narcissistic abuse, or abuse in general. Not everyone that kind of targets us is considered a narcissist, but like that resonates with a lot of people. I've been through it myself, and it's something that I think really helps people be more aware of that kind of behavior, especially as an ADHD person, because we are so impulsive, we get so excited, especially when it comes to finding that dopamine fix.
Yep.
And like, people are a strong source of dopamine.
Right.
And being able to set boundaries and recognize those behaviors and protect ourselves is extremely important.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so hard too. Like you talk about the importance of it, and then you realize that's kind of the weakness of it. So I think the reason why that video sticks out to so many people is the fact that it was a very new kind of concept that you began talking about. Not a lot of people have talked about it. I loved it because I personally have thought to myself, I was late diagnosis, right? Late in life diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Before my diagnosis, like, I've had those thoughts, like, am I a narcissist? Like, and it's like, oh no, like I get very passionate about things. I can love bomb, I'm like, no problem, like nobody's business. I make connections very strong, passionate, early, and quick, right? Like some very common things. I like to talk about things I'm interested in, right? Like, so when you made that video, that's the first thing I thought of is, oh, I've actually thought that, and it's so helpful that you're talking about it to clear that up. Like, mind-blowing for me.
Yeah. It was so many comments of people going like, what the fuck? Like, what? Just like, and it was fun just to see that reaction, just because I'm like, okay, like this isn't just me experiencing something. I spoke with a lot of confidence behind that video, and it was just kind of me exploring thoughts and connecting dots from my personal experience. Sure. And that pattern recognition that us autistic people are really good at, and just connecting those dots. And sure. You're right, like not a lot of people were talking about narcissistic behavior affecting ADHD people, and like how we are kind of their prey almost. And like now you see a lot of videos about it, you see a lot of people talking about it, and I like to think that I had influence in that.
Certainly.
That video alone, the last time I checked, had like 600 or 700 videos under that audio. And then recently I had an Instagram account post it and actually credited me, which I was like, all right,
Nice. Yeah. It's amazing when that happens.
Yeah. But they had like 150,000 followers on Instagram. And so like that, so it kind of recycled that video, which was kind of nice to kind of see that again. And just being able to help people heal.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, that is such an important thing for me because I've been through my healing journey and I know how hard it is to heal. I know how hard it is to face yourself and kind of go through all of these really, really difficult things, especially as an ADHD and autistic person, because emotions and all the things that we have that are working against us, it's hard because not only do we have to deal with the pressure of, you know, healing, but we have to deal with the pressure of how society sees us and treats us.
Right.
Yeah, and so it's like a constant thing. And to be able to just kind of get to a point where outside influences just don't affect you anymore. And I want people to get there because that is the most liberating feeling to where someone can just come up to you straight in your face and go, "You suck," or "You need to do this," or like "You're doing something wrong," or just like project their shit onto you and you just go, "Oh, okay, cool."
Yeah.
Like, thanks for the input. Um, I'll see you later. Well, probably not because yeah.
Well,
Like,
and so much of that is self confidence, right? And for me, I don't want to speak for everybody who's neurodivergent, but self confidence isn't like my forte. like let's
no,
be honest,
it's
like it's a huge barrier. Like what you touched on right there is something that's absolutely massive. Right, to get to that point is like black belt level quality, like
yeah.
into it, like being into yourself and introspective and being able to analyze yourself, and so much is just being aware, right? And I link it back to not being diagnosed and not even knowing about it to what I know now. I'm able to identify things that are going on within me. I have the vocabulary to do it. I can touch on things and make connections that I simply couldn't before.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about community? That's probably the greatest gift, is having the language to talk
Oh,
about your
yeah.
neurodivergency is massive. And you're great at explaining that, and I think you understand that connection. And I think it's certainly when I watch your educational videos, like that's something that hammers home to me, is you take the time to kind of explain it. So what inspires you to kind of dig in deeper and want to share that with everybody else?
Um, it's I just like knowing. You know,
I Perfect explanation. I understand it completely. Yeah.
you know, I I like to know the why. You know, and this isn't, and I want to like kind of preface too, like this isn't like me doing this so I don't have to process emotionally, you know, because I'm a big proponent of feel the shit out,
That's an
you know.
excellent point, right? Because there are two
Yeah.
very distinct sides of this. So,
Yeah.
continue, yes.
Yeah, because like if someone were to come up to my face and tell me that I suck, I might have an emotional response to that, but that emotional response is not going to take over my reaction. It might be like, yeah, that kind of hurts, but I don't care.
Right.
And that's the difference. And I think where some people that have that self confidence, they kind of skirt over the fact that they may still have an emotional response, but the fact that they are secure within themselves, that it's it doesn't take as much to process that, because you still can communicate with yourself that you know the truth,
Right.
you know who you are, you know that you don't suck, and that the words that other people speak towards you are really just a projection of themselves, you know, and it's more a lack in them than it is in you. And having that understanding allows you to build that self confidence, because it's not like it's such a weird way for me to think about it, because it's like I'm confident in myself because I know my flaws, I know my weaknesses, but I also know my strengths.
Yeah.
And I'm learning to trust my strengths, right? And so when someone sees a weakness in me, I evaluate the legitimacy of that perception. And if it is not something that is actionable, and so if someone's saying something to me and I cannot do anything about what it is they're telling me,
Right.
then I just don't hold on to it.
Why
Because I'm
would
like,
you?
what?
And it makes so much sense when you say it, but it's so
Yeah,
hard to do.
it is. It's super hard, because like, words are powerful. They affect us, and like when you are, in an environment where you hear so much negativity, like even the smallest thing can really affect you. And that's where like the internal processing and like the understanding of self and the understanding of others, and you know like applying that understanding to everything. Because like, okay, in the past I acted this way. I may have been defensive, or I may have projected myself onto people. I
Yeah.
may have said something that was hurtful. you know why did I do that in that moment? you know and that helps me understand others, because it's like, okay, I did this because of this, and now this person is doing something that's very similar to how I used to be.
Right.
So they must be at a certain point in their life going through something that is making them act a certain way. Now, does that excuse the behavior? No, not at all. But it's a path of understanding to where you can be like, oh, okay, well, they're just being a jackass because, they're hurting or they're going through
Right.
something or whatever. So I can let those comments go.
Right.
I don't have to carry that with me. And um, that's a big concept change, even as like a man,
Yeah.
because um, I did a video. It didn't do very well about the concept of strength. And as men, we are told that strength is how much we can carry, how much can we lift.
Mm.
We are defined on a physical sense of things. So we apply strength um, as a physical measurement to emotions. You know,
Yeah.
so since we are defined by like, how much can you lift? What's your bench? you know, well, how much emotional baggage can you carry?
Yeah.
And so it can be really difficult for even us as men to let go of things, because we are kind of conditioned to be that rock, be that pillar, be the person that people can lean on, and you know, and all of that. And I've discovered through my own exploration that real strength is how much you can let go, because by being able to let go, you then create a space for others to exist as themselves authentically.
Yeah. Oh. Oh, I'm so glad we're talking on the masculinity topic. Like I didn't even have this on my radar, but yet you're absolutely right, and it's one of the things I really enjoy talking about. You're talking about strength.
Yeah.
I always say that for me, like masculinity is vulnerability, right? It's
Yeah.
for me, it's the counterpart to femininity. It doesn't have to be opposites. It can be a
Yeah.
counterpart. It can be reflective. Why can't it be? Right? Like we can
It's
be vulnerable and open the same way, like that, and that's where growth is. And like, oh, I love that we're talking about it. Yes, you're absolutely right, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, masculinity is, like I said, it's being strong. Yes, it is like, but it's strength in compassion.
Mm-hmm.
It's strength in giving people safety.
Yes.
You know, like I had a friend that at one point, because she was going through like a bunch of like hormonal stuff, and she was getting like extremely tired, right? And so she would message me or call me and be like, "Hey, can I just come over because I'm super tired?" And she worked really close to me, and like, and she lived like 30 minutes away. She's like, "I just need a nap real quick, nap or whatever." I'm like, "Yeah," you know, and she felt bad. It's just like, "Oh, I'm sorry that like we haven't really been hanging out." I'm like, "Don't be," because like I appreciate the fact that you feel safe enough to where you can just come over and nap, to where you can be vulnerable in sleep and know
Right.
that you're going to be okay. Like if you can reach that level of strength to where like someone can just be at peace and sleep in your presence and know they're going to be safe, like that's real strength.
Yeah.
That's real vulnerability. That's real compassion towards somebody. Like I didn't care that we didn't hang out. I didn't care that we didn't interact. I appreciated the fact that they trusted me.
Right. I always
Yeah.
say that masculinity is also very constructive, right?
Mhm.
And when you're talking about that space, like that's the foundation, right? Like that, you can't build anything without a solid foundation. What you're saying is like
Yeah.
removing all of those barriers, making sure that somebody knows honestly that they know who you are and they can trust who you are and the things about you, right? And that's massive, right? It's not something that should be easily earned in life, right? And you're
No,
exactly right.
and like and it's also just being able to not judge another person.
Yeah. Oh
You know,
yeah.
like let people make mistakes. You don't have to carry their baggage. You don't have to carry their problems. You can be there to support them. You can be there to help them, guide them, but you don't have to fix them. And like and
That
like
is a
like
massively important mindset for an ADHD coach, right? Like
yeah,
everything you said right there, very important, right?
yeah, like I'm my objective is not to fix anybody because I don't really think anyone's broken. We may have things that are hurting us. We may have things that are hindering us. We may have conditions, like we've been conditioned a certain way. There might be cycles of family trauma or things that we need to break out of or become free from. But we're not broken. We just
Right.
you know we have healing to do. We
Right.
have things to just kind of move through, uh, and find the other side. And it's not something to overcome. We're
Right.
moving through it.
Right.
We're not trying to push it aside. We're not trying to push it down. We have to go through it. Like you have like
It's the shitty thing about it, right? Like you
yeah
have to do the
yeah
work. You have
yeah.
to. You're
It's
absolutely
like
right.
it's like you have to get in the trenches.
Um,
And like I was talking to somebody else. Like healing sucks. Like it's not fun.
no.
It, it's not some glamorous thing like you're going to a spa day and getting pampered. No, like freaking like it's a war zone.
It is.
Like it like you are going through the mud and you're getting hurt along the way, and it's it, incredibly difficult. And knowing how incredibly difficult it is, I'm never going to fault anybody who just says, "You know what, right now I can't."
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't, you know, and that's okay. Sometimes you just kind of have to take a breather.
Right. Yeah,
And
taking a step back, like that's one of the hardest things in life, right? Is realizing taking a step back is sometimes taking a step forward. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, like, you know, you can just be like, yeah, I know that this isn't great for me, but right now I just can't do anything about it.
right.
I don't know I don't have the energy. I don't have, what I need right now to be able to do anything about it, and that's okay. You know, as long as it's not necessarily harming yourself or others. You know, 'cause I mean I've been through harmful behaviors.
Right.
And I know you've spoken about your past and the struggles that you've been through, and
Absolutely.
especially with addiction. Like I have used alcohol, like when I was younger, it was an escape for me. I w-
Absolutely.
I I used to view my capacity to drink as some form of badge of honor.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But looking back, I'm like, oh, that was not great, And in that time, I may have known that it wasn't great for me, but I didn't know how to do anything about it. I couldn't do anything about it. I had to get to a certain point to be able to do something about it.
Exactly. A breaking point, right? Like
Hmm.
that's pretty much what it comes to, right? We're not very good at like identifying things and like weeding it out before it becomes a problem, right? We're
Yeah.
more the type of people that let things fester and build. And when you talk about addiction, I always think about, I was an alcoholic before I was diagnosed, and I became sober pre-diagnosis, like long before ADHD was even on my radar. But when I think back, um, I was absolutely self-medicating. The and it wasn't. I didn't drink socially. If I was out among people, like I'd be okay. Like if there's things to drink, that would be great. But it was being alone, and
Yeah.
it was the hardest thing for me because my mind just wouldn't stop. So I would just my favorite thing to do is just sit down, drink some beers, and play video games, right? So I would try to do that and escape. And the days that I didn't drink, I would pace around the house and I didn't know what was going on. And like my levels of anxiety would go through the roof, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest reasons why I want to talk about neurodivergencies is because there's people who are going through that who, if they had any kind of idea of how their brain was working against them, they could counteract that and fight that battle so much better. So when you talk about helping people with addiction, oh, I'm all on board with that. Like you've touched a sensitive spot for me, obviously, and I love it. I think it's very
Yeah.
important that we talk about these things, right? It's very
Yeah.
hard to talk about. It scares me how little it's talked about in our community because the numbers for addiction and neurodivergency are astronomical, but the amount of people who are actually talking about it on social media, on TikTok, and everything is very, very low, right? So I
Yeah.
thank you for talking about it. Thank you for bringing it up, and I would love to have your perspectives on it. Yeah, more, please.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like 5 to 10 times more likely to develop an addiction as a neurodivergent person. Um, and before I moved, I actually had an opportunity to go to an IOP group, um, like an addiction group that my therapist ran, and like she invited me to like speak and like educate about ADHD to them because none of them had any idea about ADHD, and these were like people that were still fighting that battle. So not all of them. Like it was interesting to see like how as I started talking about certain topics, they would become more engaged.
Yeah.
Because because at first, like when you're in that kind of mindset of healing, you're like, I don't want to really want to listen to this, or you're kind of
Yeah.
closed off to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things, and you're still fighting that kind of inner battle. And I remember this one guy, he was like through most of it was very kind of closed off. And then I started talking about like children, like how ADHD is genetic and can pass on to children, and like he perked up because he had kids, and then like you know, and I think that kind of helped with like, oh, I want to support my children so like they don't have that same struggle. And like it's so important to talk about the not really the dark side of ADHD, but just more of like the things that, you know, are kind of considered taboo,
Yeah.
you know? Like I don't understand why things are taboo.
Right. Well, you talked about expectations being placed on you and
Yeah.
not being a big fan of that, right?
Yeah, I think that might be my autistic brain being like, well, why is this taboo? Like, what makes something taboo?
Well, I think it scares a lot of people, right?
Yeah.
Like
So
that's what it is. That one specific. I can't
yeah,
answer what makes everything taboo because there's a lot of
yeah,
a lot of nuance to that. But
yeah,
that specifically, yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. Is people are
yeah,
just terrified because it can happen to anybody. It happens everywhere. Like, and it's not just you can become addicted to tons of shit. You can become addicted to a routine so much that as soon as you deviate it just destroys your whole day, right? Like there's 1,000 different things we all become addicted to, but there's very few that actually become so detrimental that it wrecks your world, right?
yeah. I mean, talking about being addicted to routine. Um, Something that I've been thinking about, and I haven't. I should probably make a video over it because as an autistic person, routines are, kind of important for us, and like we
Just
get
this is gauche, right?
yeah, but like I've always kind of been confused, and like it was one of those things of like questioned why, like whether or not I was actually autistic or not. Is like my routines are so chaotic, like it's very much ADHD, and I'm like I don't really know like what I would consider routine for me as an autistic person, because like my day to day is pretty loose. I purposely do that,
Right.
because I know
Smart.
if I plan, if I plan things and it doesn't go according to plan, then that does upset me. That does disrupt me. So okay, like I understand, like you know, that is autistic. If you plan things and it's disrupted, then that can cause a dysregulation. But then I started realizing in certain relationships how I acted after them. And honestly, like there's a couple times where like part of like I was in a relationship and that breakup is kind of what triggered me seeking the diagnosis because how I was acting.
Mm.
And the more I explored it was that relationship was my routine. I developed a routine based around a person,
Yeah,
of that person being in my life,
that's so
being
interesting.
consistent.
Yeah.
And so when that person was suddenly removed, it caused me to have a meltdown.
Wow. Yeah, I could. Oh, I totally. Yeah, I can totally get that. That's so fascinating. Honestly, like
Yeah.
I it makes so much sense, right? Like, but I've never thought of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's and I think
How did you
that
process that? All right, did you come to this revelation like in the moment, or was it reflective? Like looking
oh,
back, you came to this conclusion. Like, did you know this was kind of happening during like the melt? Like, I don't know what a meltdown's like, so I can't even say like during the
yeah.
meltdown phase or like post meltdown
I
phase. Did you realize what that was? Like,
I didn't know I was having a meltdown
oh, okay.
because this was like, you know, the first one that I think of was pre both ADHD and autistic diagnosis. The second one that I can think of was um, kind of um, in the midst of learning everything, and now it's very much reflective of like, oh, I acted this way
Oh, dude, I'm
because
sorry.
I was having a meltdown.
Right.
I was in like the inability to let go of a person. or that relationship, and that struggle, and like why these breakups were so hard is because I had developed a routine, and it was disruptive, and then it was like continuously disruptive because it was a sudden change, and then like if it got dragged out, like it would just be continuously disrupting me. And so my behaviors would not improve, or I would be okay and then not because something would happen. And then like
Yeah.
so it was very chaotic for me. And like in those moments I was like, what is going on? Like I knew something wasn't
Right.
right. Like it's like this is not me. Like I know logically certain things I shouldn't be doing, or I should just let go, or I should stop doing certain things, or just like, I knew the logic of like I need to not do these things, but I had no like control in the way. Like it would
Yeah.
just like these things would happen, and I was like, why? Like why am I acting this way? Like what is going on? And it was hard. And like now that I'm more aware and I have done that reflection, like you know um if I were to get into a relationship with someone, like I know how to manage that better. Like I know how to be like, okay, you know um not to get so attached to the person in routine, you
Yeah.
know obviously there's going to be a certain level of routine when you are in a relationship with someone, but in a way like being aware. So like if there is a disruption of routine,
Right.
I can communicate better, I can handle it better, I can self-soothe better,
That's a
and I
big
think
one.
that's
Yeah.
yeah. And that, because even in the relationship, like if especially like say beginning a relationship, you are constantly going on dates, or like you consistently do something with a person when you first start a relationship with them. And as an autistic person, that can become dangerous because like that can become routine.
Okay.
This is how the relationship is going to be. This
Uh,
is routine.
right. That I can see
But
that being very rigid though, especially
Mhm.
placing that at the beginning of a relationship, right?
Yeah, but as we all know, relationships change over time. Things happen. Sometimes a plan doesn't go according to plan, you know, and as an autistic person, that can cause disruptions, that can cause meltdowns, that can cause us to lash out, you know, and our partners, if they all they're seeing is the frustration, the anger, the meltdown, us acting certain ways, you know, and so that can be very hard on them.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
being aware on how we act in relationships is important.
I love that you mentioned the other perspective too, right? I feel like a lot of times it's easy for us to get so swept up in the way our brains are working, and thinking that we lack that step, that extra compassion and empathy to place ourselves in other people's shoes. And I love that you're able to do that. And I'm sure that's what makes you a phenomenal ADHD coach, right? Like you're showing off your skills, is what I'm saying. Like seriously, it relationships are hard no matter what, like
Yeah.
for anybody, right? But if you throw in neurodivergency, if it's a neurodivergent person with another neurodivergent person, or a neurodivergent person with a neurotypical person, doesn't matter. There's always going to be something different because we're on a spectrum, right?
Yep.
Like there's going to be conflict there because of our neurodivergencies, and learning how to, you said, self-soothe. I think that's a huge one for us. I know for me, like rumination and building on negative thoughts and assuming the worst, specifically in relationships, is not healthy, but it's something I tend to do. Like my wife doesn't say she loves me on the way out the door. I'm like, oh, she's angry at me. What did I do
Yeah.
wrong? Like, what's wrong?
Yeah.
Like, and I tend to build on that. So let's touch on some relationship and self-soothing and some of the things you've learned as you've kind of delved into your own experiences with that.
Yeah, and I think it all kind of connects together with a lot of things that we've been talking about, like having that confidence in self and examining self, and using logic. to help. Like I use logic
I love that
probably the
approach. Like so many people say emotion, but I think very logically first. Like I like to
yeah.
let the emotion come later. Yeah. Okay, continue. Yeah, yeah.
In fact, like, cause and then yeah, like, I allow the emotion to happen. I feel it out, and like when it comes to feeling emotions, it's also feeling what's happening in your body. It's not just the you know what we call the emotion.
Right.
You feel sad. Okay, well, how does it feel in your body? You know, and same thing with like rejection, or when you said like, if my wife doesn't say I love you going out the door, how does your body respond to that? All right.
Right. Yeah.
And so you're able to recognize that kind of trigger, and then you can use your logic of like, she love like she loves me. Like,
Right.
just because she didn't say it this one time does not mean she doesn't love me. And that's hard because you're fighting against yourself.
Yep.
And in a way, like, you know, like, neurodivergent brains, to me, like the way I visualize and conceptualize it, is like having another identity. Not in a
Okay.
dissociative way.
Right.
Not, but it's like, especially like ADHD autistic brains. It's like there's the person that I am, me. Then there's the ADHD me, and then there's the autistic me. And all three of them are me, but we communicate to each other in a way. And I'm not like, like I said, it's not dissociative. Like, I'm fully aware of what's
Sure.
going on. But it's just like, in that sense, like, for me, if my partner said I love you going out the door every day, my autistic brain is, that's routine. That is going to happen. That's rigid.
Right.
And so I would probably have that same reaction of, oh, they didn't say it, so something has changed, and that can cause a dysregulation.
Yeah.
You didn't say I love you. You didn't do routine. you know and then ADHD is like, well, now they just hate you.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
The hammer blow. Right.
Yeah. And so, like, it's being able to kind of like communicate with yourself,
Right.
logically.
I love the way you're explaining this because I can see the top-down thinking, right?
Yeah.
Because I can see, okay, this is me, the way you're trying to like piece this together, right? And there's different facets that you're kind of overlaying upon yourself to explain the way that you interpret things. I always talk about it as like lenses, like looking through a telescope, right? Switch
Yeah.
out the lens, I put in my ADHD lens, let's examine this, right?
Yeah.
Very similar. I love the way that you're kind of like building this up because it's very conceptual. I'm wondering, are you the type of person that can see, visualize thoughts, or are you like the aphantasia side where you don't get any mental images?
I'm more on the aphantasia side.
Really?
And that is actually kind of something I've been learning about myself too. Like, that was um an interesting discovery, because like I always thought I could visualize,
Mm-hmm.
because like how I visualize is through references.
Okay.
It's not like, I can't, like, when you say visualize an apple, I don't see an apple, right? But I know what an apple looks like. So I can basically construct what an apple looks like through thought, because of memory of apple.
Okay.
But I can't manifest the image of an apple.
So like more like a recall thing instead of like
Yeah.
a creation
Yeah.
type thing. Interesting.
And like, and so that, like, and I know there's different degrees of aphantasia too. Like,
Mhm.
some people with aphantasia, they can visualize just a little bit, and I think I can visualize a little. But for the most part, like when I close my eyes and I try to really visualize stuff, it's really, really difficult, or I just don't. Um, but because I, can construct through memory,
Yeah.
it's like it's it's kind of hard for me to explain because it's
What-
like, yeah,
Just tell me
yeah,
exactly how you think without
yeah.
any like
No,
flaws in the way you explain it,
no.
please. Yeah.
It's like, it, it's almost like a ghost of an image.
Okay, like a silhouette kind of.
Yeah, like, if like, trying to visualize a castle right now. Like, I know what a castle looks like. I've seen multiple images of castles, both fantasy castles and real castles. So, like, I know what that looks like, but I don't see it.
Fascinating.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's that, yeah, it's like more of a memory recall of like, oh, I know what that looks like, but I'm not able to like construct it. And like that makes sense because like when I was younger, I used to draw, and I always sucked at trying to draw from memory.
Huh.
But if I were to look at something and draw it, I was exceptional at it because I like
Yeah.
that attention to detail. And people were always really like wow, like you, because like, it would almost be picture perfect,
It
but
makes me wonder how much subconsciously you have to pay attention to things more, right? Like
yeah,
if you can't visualize it, your memory's doing most of the legwork, right? Now I'm no scientist, so this might just be
yeah,
total bullshit.
yeah,
But it like to be able to reconstruct that is a different process, a different procedure. Where I'm sure a lot of that has to do with remembering, like even like positioning is not something like I would have to worry about remembering because I can see
yeah,
it, right? Like I can just see it pop up. But for you, you'd have to remember like angles and like the way things are positioned, and it's just more data points, basically,
yeah.
right?
Like it's something too that certain locations, like even from the past, I could map out.
Whoa, really?
Like I can map out the apartment that my family used to live in Northern California when I was in third grade. I remember the layout through just that, I guess, that memory.
Uh huh.
But like I don't really like I can't visualize what it looked like.
That's interesting. Do you think a lot of that's more
Yeah.
like feel, like?
It,
Uh,
it it's just like memory. Like it's that,
I wanted to
you
say
know,
like muscle memory, but that didn't
yeah.
sound quite right.
Yeah, like it's just so it's interesting. Like I can kind of remember layouts of places that I've been. Like I can map it out. Very rudimentary, but
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, but it's kind of interesting to me, like how my memory works and like what I can recall, and how I do like, yeah, like you said, like just the details of things, like how I remember certain things or how I can bring it up in a visual sense for me.
Right. I love asking people that question. It's probably my favorite question to ask people. Just tell me how you think. Like like
Yeah,
what goes on when you think? Because for me, I spent so much time just assuming like everybody was like me. Like
yeah.
no joke, a lot of ignorance. Like I'm not even gonna lie. Like I just assumed, right? And
Oh
it
yeah, I
makes a
mean,
lot of ignorance. Like when you assume everybody's just kind of operating on your level, you write off a lot of people's issues, problems, struggles. I feel terrible about it, right? And so I make a point to try to be more aware because it's just a built-in ignorance. I put my head in the sand about a lot of things, right? We all have. Like we're all ignorant of
yeah,
something, right? Like
yeah. I mean, that's kind of reminds me of a story. A friend of mine, last year, like she was from high school, and we were hanging out, and I don't remember this, but she does. And she was like, we're talking about high school and everything. And I was like, yeah, high school was, pretty easy for me. Like, I coasted through high school. Like, one of the videos I did, like, the burnt out gifted kid, but like I was the like kind of like the smart kid that didn't try.
right.
And she was talking. It's like, I like you would frustrate me in high school so much. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, you made everything look so easy. I was like, what? No, I didn't. It's like, no, no. Like, I would be struggling in a class, and you'd just be like, oh no, it's super easy. You just do this, this, and this. You
Right.
know? And I'm like, I didn't do that. It's like, no, yeah, you did. I'm like, oh well, sorry.
Right.
You know, like, so like, and it kind of goes in that concept of like, not understanding that people think like us. Like,
Right.
I didn't understand why people couldn't understand things.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and
Uh,
I think the most tragic thing is it's so much it's caused us to like write off the things we're good at.
yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah, and that's I mentioned that before too. Is like it's hard for us to take a compliment when we accomplish something because it's easy for us.
Yeah. Oh, that's a hard concept for like neurotypicals to grasp.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I do something, I expected to do it. Like
Yeah.
so when it's done, I'm like, okay, like let's go on to the next thing, right?
But when someone that can't do what we just did sees us doing it, it's exceptional to them. So like that's actually helped me accept compliments.
It's
Like
a struggle. Like,
like I use logic in a lot of ways to help me connect with
I love that
people, and
approach.
because like it's such a easy way to think about it for me, because like, okay, logically this person can't do what I just did, so to them what I just did was magic. you know
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And so to me internally, I don't think it's exceptional. I think it was, oh, I did it because I knew how to do it and it was easy and no big deal. So, but I don't want to take away their magic.
Right.
I don't want to take away their experience. I don't want to take away from the fact that they are using energy and time to compliment me.
That's an,
I don't want to disrespect that.
I love that you put it on somebody else. Like
Yeah.
I can't do things for myself. So if you're telling me like Spencer, you need to take a compliment because you've earned it, right? I'm always like, no.
Yeah.
But if you're like, Spencer, you need to take this compliment because that person is taking time out of their day to pay you a compliment. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I'm listening now.
Because like, we may not feel we earned it, but if we're trying to be respectful and appreciative of someone's time and effort into us,
That's amazing.
that's completely different.
Yeah.
It allows us to be more receptive.
Absolutely.
Because we are caring and compassionate people. And so when you approach things with compassion, it's a lot easier to manage things. And so it's the same thing of like when you are dealing with people that are in a different part of their healing journey. If maybe they are struggling and maybe their behaviors are not great, and we have this fix it mentality, we have this you know instinct to see the potential in people,
Yeah.
but we can't get trapped into that, right? Like we can't like a person for their potential because that's not who they are. So we have to see them for who they are, and that's coming back to the strength is
Right.
in giving the space of people allowing to exist authentically in that moment. If this person's behaviors are self-destructive, we can be compassionate towards them and allow them to be that person because they need to be that person right now. And where we can be is the stability that they probably have not experienced yet. so they know that it exists,
Right.
and so it can encourage them to help themselves. Like, and also we are being respectful to who they are. Because if you like a person for their potential and you interact with them as their potential, not who they are, they're going to resent you for that.
Right. Well, especially when they don't live up to it, right? You talked
Yeah.
about putting expectations on other people, right? That's the reverse, right? Like that's you
Yeah.
doing. Oh, I love it, right? And you're that's when you know you got a good philosophy, right? Is when it permeates down to those layers, right? Because you can pick
Yeah.
out examples just like that.
Yeah. And so be the safe space, you know? Like, that doesn't mean allow someone to treat you poorly, you
A
know?
very important point.
That is, you are the space to where they can behave as who they are as authentically as possible, but then you can also set the boundaries.
Right, and I was just about to circle to that because you had brought it up
Mhm.
before. Let's talk a little bit about boundaries and setting those. We talked about kind of leaning into a routine, right, and
Mhm.
so avoiding that reliance on that routine. I'm sure you've had to place some boundaries
Yeah.
in your life to kind of avoid hazards. I've certainly had to do that, especially around drinking. Right, like the biggest
Mhm.
boundary I have is thou shalt not drink, right? Like,
Yeah. And I'm sure if someone were to come up to you and tell you, "Hey, you need to get to the point to where you can just have a couple beers," that would be like someone that you would set a hard boundary on and be like, "No,
right.
that like that's not going to happen. And if you continue to try to push that on me, then we're not going to ever hang out or interact
Yep.
because that you're already showing me that you're not respecting me."
Yep.
you know and boundaries are all about respect. Boundaries are, they're hard because we're made to feel by people that can't respect them that we are the wrong. you know
Yeah. Right, and we're
but
ridiculous for setting them. And how
yeah,
dare? Yeah.
so using logic
Bing.
is that person's just showing you who they are and the fact that they can't respect you. And so logically that person's not in a space to be around you.
Right.
And on an emotional level it sucks. On an emotional level it's hard and it's not easy. But if you allow yourself to feel and be like, okay, I am compassionate towards this person, I care about this person, I want the best for this person, but I can't hurt myself in that process.
Right.
I
Well,
can't
there's so much
sacrifice.
emotionally tied into it that you mentioned respect. I think so much we confuse rejection or that feeling of rejection with some type of respect level, right? Like where they don't
Yeah.
respect me if they reject me, right? Where you're only validated through their validation, if that
Yeah.
makes sense, right? And what you're talking about is self confidence, and so being able to cut through the bullshit, right? And knowing
Yeah.
yourself, being able, and you talked about doing the work. Like you can't get to this point without digging into yourself first and knowing what's
Yeah.
true about yourself. I love that you mentioned looking at your strengths and weaknesses, right? Because I preach about that, right? That's something that's big for me, mostly because I'm the type of person that worries about my weaknesses. But I've
Yeah.
found ways to, at the very least, cope with them,
Yeah.
identify them. That's a huge thing. But when we're talking about doing the work, and I want your opinion on this, for me, I've learned that there's been layers of work. The first is
Oh yeah.
identification, right? Second is acceptance, right? Like you got to be able to identify there's something going on. Second, you got to accept it. Third, you've got to analyze it, right? You got to dig into it. What's causing this? Like, what's the point behind this? Why am I feeling this way?
Yeah.
But
And a
as
lot
soon
of
as you hit that point, there's one extra step, and you got to do something with it, right? And so, like, now I feel like in my emotional journey, I'm at that point where it's like I've done that work. Now let's do something with it. And I think you've done something with it by helping people, right? Like you've done that work, and now you're ready to help others, right?
Yeah, and here's the thing too, and I don't want to come off as like I'm this master guru at all of this.
Sure.
You know, like
Very important.
I still fuck up. I still struggle. I still make mistakes. I still, have difficulty sometimes with boundaries. You know, because it's really hard to like be completely aware of your needs 24/7.
Yeah.
You know, because we're human. We're interacting with other humans. You know, we need to allow some flexibility, right?
Yeah.
Like people make mistakes. And so that's another part of that healing journey is allowing people to be who they are, and allowing yourself to be who you are, allowing yourself to make those mistakes, allowing yourself to, you know, set a boundary that, fuck, I set this boundary, but it was porous and I didn't really hold it firm.
Right.
So, like, okay, what can I do about that? Like, and a lot of it is like that communication and being able to communicate with the people that we interact with, and like, hey, I know this has been going on and I've been kind of allowing this behavior, but like I really can't anymore.
Right. And I love that you started in the middle of like a relationship. So I feel like so many times when we talk about a boundary, it's like setting a boundary with a new person, right? But it's much harder to put a boundary in place in an existing relationship, right?
Yeah.
Nobody talks about that. They just say, hey, if you're starting a relationship, put some boundaries in place. But how do you approach that? Getting heard, your needs met, and instituting a boundary in a relationship, whether it be romantic or otherwise. Like, what would your advice be to somebody out there who's looking to set any type of boundary with somebody else that already has an existing relationship?
So the way I like to see boundaries is it's a bridge to interact with me a different way.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
So, obviously there are some hard wall boundaries of like, for you don't drink. That's a hard wall boundary. But you can have, I don't drink, but we can do this instead.
Right.
So so it's inviting someone to interact with you a different way.
Right. Yeah, an alternative path.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you are in the middle of a relationship, and you're certain behaviors have been going on, and you've allowed it, like, first thing is like, don't shame yourself, don't guilt yourself, because like we're human, we care about people, we want people, part of
I
allowing
love that
people
you
to be,
mentioned that first. I love that
Yeah.
you mentioned that first.
because like, like, because there's no shame in it, like there is really none at all. We make mistakes and we learn and we grow, and that's just constant. Healing is not linear.
Absolutely. Perfectly said.
So, if someone treats you a certain way and you kind of brush it under the rug, and they do it again, you brush it under the rug, and it happens again, and you're just like, you know what, I can't do that anymore. Like, you approach it honestly, authentically, and the best way to do it too is without accusation,
Yeah.
because most people, how they behave, how they treat you has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. So most people are not trying to be malicious.
I
And
absolutely agree with it. Yeah.
so you approach them with, when this happens, it makes me feel this way, and I'd much prefer that this happen instead. So you have the problem, the feeling, the solution.
Right.
You
I
know,
love it.
and it's not like you did this to me and you're wrong. It's, hey, when you said this thing, or when you did this thing, it made me feel this way,
Right.
and I don't really appreciate that, and I really don't like feeling that way. So instead, can we do this
I love that you
instead?
come with a solution at the end, being
Hmm.
solution based people. I think that's
Yeah.
very important where it becomes more of a collaboration, right? And that's
Yeah.
one thing I love talking to neurodivergent people so much, is because the conversation's so collaborative. Like what
Yeah.
we've just gone through, it doesn't feel like we've been talking for like an hour and a half already, right? Like it just feels
Yeah.
like we've just been building a very organic thing here, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like the way we communicate is very additive, right? Like
Yeah.
we have a tendency to interpret things our own way, add our experience to it, and try to level that experience. So when we talk, it literally is a constructive conversation, right? Like
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And and when you approach things with a collaboration, and like what I and this is my kind of attempt to approach everything, is with compassion and curiosity.
Love it.
You know, so understand that the people that you're interacting with aren't actually actively trying to hurt you. You know, doesn't mean you excuse their behaviors, obviously, but
Right.
like, so that allows you to approach them with the curiosity of why they are doing the things they're doing. Like, hey, like, this is going on. Like, can you help me understand why this is going on?
Yeah.
That's collaborative.
Right.
You're asking questions. You're
Exactly.
opening up
And no,
dialogue.
and nothing's accusatory.
Yeah.
Right, and that's very important. Like, nobody likes to be accused of anything. Neurotypical, neurodivergent, doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. You know, and it doesn't mean you can't be like, hey, you did this. Like, this is a thing that you did. But like, when that happened, it affected me this way.
Right.
So it's like you're still bringing facts, but you're not just putting it on them and making them defensive.
Right.
You're trying to open up the conversation and invite them into the conversation
That's a great
to
point.
find a collaborative solution.
Because when you're building that boundary, you do want an agreement between two
Hmm.
people, right? Like you don't want somebody who's opposed to your boundaries, right? So it makes
Yeah.
sense to when you're setting those in place, you don't have to be the only one that's working to do that, right? It can
Yeah.
be a two-way. Like some boundaries, sure, set your own boundaries, but I think there is something to be said, and I think this is, we talked about adding too much rigidity into a relationship early on. I think some
Yeah.
of the important things is setting those boundaries together, right?
Yeah.
Instead of setting a boundary here and somebody setting their boundary way over here and having no middle ground or too much middle ground. I think, and the reason why I ask is because while you're getting to know somebody, we all grow and change and experience different things, right? You don't really know what you like, what you don't like at all, right? And I'm constantly learning and growing and changing and doing all kinds of different things online, right? So boundaries for me online have been totally foreign to me. Like I went from like don't talk to anybody online, don't trust anybody online, right? Like don't share anything about yourself, to like sharing like a lot of my life, like a lot
Yeah.
of my life. And I wanted to talk a little bit about like love bombing, because I feel like I did that on TikTok where like I kind of fell in love with TikTok and I just kind of put it all out there, and I don't regret it. But we talked about being vulnerable. I went from being absolutely just like a hermit, having nothing to do with anything social media, to like just plastering it all over the place.
Yeah, and like
I'm just absorbing that. Like, it's still a shock to me, but like we get so into things and so passionate, so wrapped up, and just kind of like dive head first. We take a lot of risk, right? We talked a lot about that in this episode. Let's try to put a bow on it. like let's try to make all of this kind of come back. Let's talk about where you want to go next, right? Because like a lot of stuff wasn't planned, so it's totally fair if you're like, I don't have any fucking clue.
I do have an idea of where I want to go. Like, I love coaching. You know, I think I do a lot of good with it. I don't know if I will always be a coach. I'm a really good speaker.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I know.
I'm good. Yeah. Like I excel at breaking things down. I excel at communicating those concepts in understandable ways to where people can absorb them. And so, like, I would love to speak about ADHD at events or do a TED Talk. You know? Like a TED Talk would be amazing. You know, I want to build community. Like, you know, I have my own Discord. That like I want people to come and have that safety to be themselves and to make mistakes and grow, but be receptive to the growth. Like, that's another thing about people when they're trying to grow, is they have to be willing to grow. And that's part of, like, you know, allowing people to be who they are, because if they don't want to change, then there's nothing you can do, even if you see the potential in them. So, you know, but having the strength to let them exist as them, you know, without resentment, without any sort of you know, negativity there. You can be like, all right, you're on your path. I care about you, but you need to find your way. You're always welcome.
Right.
You know, but like right now you need to be on your journey. So like I want to have a space for people to come in and, you know, exist and learn and grow and help each other and like support each other and be better. You know, I'm a creative person, so like I do poetry, I write, you know, I have a lot of creative ventures that I'm pursuing. So like just have a lot that I want to do.
Right.
And I think coaching is a step towards that. But in the long run, I feel I can help people maybe on a bigger scale in other ways. You know, I want to do classes to where I can educate multiple people at once. Yeah, I don't know. It's planned but not planned, you know?
What? Organized chaos, right? That's what it's all about, right?
So, and you know, and I'm one person, so I think my more immediate is trying to find a support network for myself, and to kind of help support the things that I want to do. You know, I I keep telling like I keep saying, like, I need a secretary.
Oh yeah.
And the thing is, like, on a bigger scale, is I think if part of mental health support was to give every ADHD person a personal secretary, we would take over the world.
I honestly, it's a personal goal of mine. I'm a business owner, but I don't have any employees, right? It's a personal goal of mine to have an assistant someday. You're absolutely right. I agree with that 1,000%.
um, but yeah, like if I could pay someone to be my assistant, I would hire someone. But right now I can't afford it. So like I would need someone that is willing to believe in me enough to where like yeah, eventually they would get paid. But that's
Right.
really hard to ask someone that,
Right.
you know.
For sure.
Dedicate your time to help me so I could pay you later. Like
Right.
that just seems kind of shady and I don't want to do that to someone. Um but like if people want to like help here or help there, and this is actually my biggest struggle as a person in my healing journey is I know I need help and I can say to people I need help and then people be like, hey, I'm willing to help you, but then I don't give them anything to do.
Yeah, right. Like, I've done the hard part of acknowledging that I need help. Yeah, that's a conundrum, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm actually in the same exact boat. I have somebody that's helping me with my website. And they're like, okay, what do you need done? I was like, just a few designs. And they're like, okay, I'm going to do a mock-up. They did the mock-up, send it to me. I haven't reviewed it in like a week.
Yeah.
All I'm supposed to do is review it, but I've asked them for help,
Yeah.
and it's like, ah.
See, like you've at least gave them a task.
Right, right. I'm a step ahead, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just like, I need help, and then someone's like, hey, what do you need help with? Let me get back to you
Right.
on that. I don't
Oh,
know.
difficult question.
It's like, well, like I can do that, but I can do that, and I can do that. So what would I want to get? Like, no, I need to like pick.
How
the
much of
things
that is prioritization in your struggles with that? Like, because a lot of times if you ask for help and somebody's giving you help, they're like, okay, I'm here, tell me what to do. I always struggle with like, okay, what's the most important thing I could have this person
Yeah.
do for me, right? And trying to
Mhm.
choose. There's a decision paralysis and a hierarchy issue there
Yeah.
for me.
I think honestly, if I would need someone that can just come in and see the chaos and go, I'm doing this. Take the choice out of my hands
Yeah.
and just and do, which is like that takes a special kind of like relationship with someone, but like and me trusting them to do it, you know, or you know,
That's a huge one.
and or just like I think even if it's small stuff, you know, like helping with organizing events that I schedule or whatever, or like just doing little tiny small things that can take just even the smallest bit of pressure off my plate, you know, and that would be beneficial. And I think that's where a lot of ADHD people struggle with is like we have so much on our plate that we struggle to do those small things
Right.
because yeah, the prioritization is really hard for us. But if we can have someone that just comes in and go, all this simple shit, we're just gonna take off your
Yep.
plate. We're
Yep.
gonna do this. It's gonna take us 5 minutes, and like you don't have to worry about it at all. And like that would probably be the biggest relief for me because then I can focus on the bigger picture.
So I actually right before Christmas I made a TikTok that said if you have an ADHD person in your life, a great present for them would be just volunteering to do all the minutia minuscule tasks like going to the DMV and like getting their license renewed, like all the crap, like the little things in life that bog you down, just do it for them. And people,
Yep.
it was a massive video. I got like probably like 100,000 views on it or something. But like people were like, yeah, absolutely. And some people were like, oh, that's my nightmare because they can't release that control. They want to control every little bit of it too.
Yeah, and like it's hard to let go of that control, and I think that comes down to our confidence as well. And because we use the accomplishment of tasks as a way to build ourselves up. And so when we allow someone else to do it for us, it almost feels like a failure.
Yeah. I always hear
Because
the word should. I
yeah,
should be able to do that. And
yeah.
that's the shame word. That's the guilt word,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and so it's a lot of it is reframing, which we are kind of bad at it. And like, I hate the word mindfulness, but like, we
Yeah.
have to be mindful of how we think. Um, and so like taking away that word should, it's like I need to get this done. Okay, I need to get this done. So can I get this done? Yes or no? Uh, no. Okay, but this person says they can do it for me. If I let them do it for me, is this going to negatively affect me? Well, no, because it's going to get done.
Right.
So logic, like we've
Yeah.
been using logic a
Yeah.
lot,
No,
and
I
like,
love it. I
you know,
think it's important.
you know, and I try to use logic as coping skills for ADHD because like we are very logical type people, and so like asking ourselves the questions like, and this is one of my favorite questions, like, if I don't do this thing right now, is it going to negatively affect me? Because that gives you the power to not do it.
Right. Well, it creates a hierarchy of needs, right?
Hmm.
Like we talk about, you got to eat, drink, shelter is all important, right?
Yeah.
And if you're afraid, if you're unsafe, all of those kind of play a role into that. So when you do that, you put things up above, right? Like you create a hierarchy, exactly. I keep saying that, but that's what you're doing, and so you're able to do that prioritization. It takes that step out. You don't have to prioritize anymore because it's already done in a ranking for you.
Yeah. So like, right now, like my room's a mess. Partly because like my parents came and visited and they dumped a bunch of my shit in my room. And if I don't organize it, is it going to negatively affect me? Well, no, it's not going to negatively affect me. You know, I will work through it as quickly as I can, and I have. It's a lot neater now. It's not where I want it to be, but it's a lot better. And that allowed me to give myself the patience that I needed. So
Yeah.
I didn't have to do the all or nothing mindset. I was able to work slowly and get it bin by bin by bin instead of having to do it all at once.
Right.
And so it's all about giving yourself that power. You know,
I like
give
that.
yourself power, give yourself permission. So when someone's offering to help you, like, if I let them help me, is this going to negatively affect me? Well, no, it's not going to negatively affect you.
Right.
This is help. Like you're not failing. You're not.
Right. You're not a
You know.
burden. Like that's
Yeah.
that's my biggest thing is, hey, I don't want to
Yeah.
inconvenience you. I could use some help. And like that's a hard thing to say.
Yeah.
And I think I value
Yeah.
my time so little
Yeah.
that it offends me sometimes. Like I used to say, I would rather waste an hour of my own time than 5 minutes of somebody else's time. And I look back on that and I'm like, what kind of sick fuck would say that my time is just as valuable as somebody else's time? Like, what
and,
is going on?
and another thing too is like you are not responsible for that other person.
Right.
You're not responsible
Right.
for their emotions. You're not responsible for them, you know, putting their time however
Right.
they want to.
Oh, you're
If
absolutely
yeah,
correct, sir. Thank you for the ADHD coach and pow right in the face right there.
like so if someone wants to help you, let them. And I'm telling myself this, like because I'm not responsible for how they spend their time. If they want to choose to spend their time helping me, I'm going to let them. And it can also double back as, do I feel worth
Yeah.
that person's time?
Yeah.
And so then we go back to the logic of, well, who am I to tell another person how they should spend their time? Why, like, and I'm being disrespectful to their
Right.
autonomy and their choices if I reject them wanting to spend their time on me.
Right.
It's the same thing with compliments.
Right. I was just about to say, I love that thinking. So, and so much of, I said it last time, so much of what I do is rooted in service for other people. Right.
Yeah.
And that's how I show I care about. Like, if you see me spending my time and my focus and my energy on something for you, just know that that's my way of showing love. Right.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. Like I enjoy doing things for people. Well, I know I'm not the only one that does that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Let someone do that for me.
Right. It's okay.
And
It's,
yeah,
it's I man, I have loved this. I can't believe like we're at 2 hours already. That
I know.
Michael, this honestly, I knew this conversation would be good. Like I knew it, just because we've had conversations like this before. But this
Yeah.
was phenomenal. Like let me just say, I really love your perspective. I love that you approach things so logically. It really helps me understand things because that's where I try to approach things too. Because emotional dysregulation makes the emotional side not so trustworthy all the time, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and that's and I want to preface too, like I use logic as a means to understand,
right.
but I still allow the emotions to happen.
Yeah.
Like it's a balance, you
Yeah.
know. It's all about not letting the logic control you and not letting the emotion control
Right.
you. It's that happy medium because like you can logically understand something and still feel about it.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
the the emotions are valid, are
Right.
always going to be.
Right.
So like
And there's two sides to it, and I love that you address it, right? Because
yeah.
so many times we feel conflicted when we know what we should be doing, right? The logical
Mhm.
side, but the emotional side is tied to something we shouldn't be doing or
Mhm.
counterproductive.
Yeah.
And being able to identify that is super important. You're the first person that's really kind of attacked it on this show, kind of that perspective. I love getting other people's perspectives. We didn't even talk about what a paradox ADHD is. Can we please talk? Like, give me 5 minutes on
Yes.
a paradox, please.
Oh yeah. So yeah, like the paradox. I mean, it's ADHD is two ducks tied together going opposite directions because we can be hyper focused on something but then easily distracted. You know, we can be late to to places or honestly be overly early. Like we can forget where we left our phone, but remember that one obscure item underneath 30 boxes in the corner. You know, so it's very paradoxical in nature, or a paradox.
Right. Ah,
Uh,
beautiful.
and you know, and then like we are also armed with a yellow rock.
Yes, the Yellow Rock Brigade.
Yes, because when life was handing out lemons, they gave us a yellow painted rock instead, and they told us to squeeze, but we can't make lemonade out of a rock. So instead, we just used our outside of the box thinking skills because we are very you know words
Solution based.
solution based. There we go. Um, and so we just use our rock instead to find lemonade from other sources, and sometimes that might be just you know by force,
Right.
because sometimes we have to force our way through
Right.
things.
I
Uh,
when I first heard the paradox, I thought it was perfect. Right, like I talk so much, and my understanding of ADHD, the way I've conceptualized it to myself, is very much I view it as like a scale, right? Where so much of the time we're either hyper focused into something and the scale's unbalanced on this end, or we can't focus on anything, right? And so much we strive for that balance. And everybody I've talked to, all 8 episodes I've done of this, everybody has touched on balance in one way or another. So when you talk about the paradoxical pull in different directions of 2 ducks kind of pulling on each other, that's the way I view every symptom of ADHD, because I feel like ADHD, you have pros and cons of everything. And so when I look at like even like the depths of my understanding, I try to look for that balance. And I don't try to look at good or bad, right? Because we shouldn't be assigning morality to anything to do with ADHD symptoms, right?
Oh, yeah.
But I'm looking at like beneficial and non-beneficial to my life, right? I feel like every symptom has that, and then every symptom has like a counter symptom to also balance with. And so when I heard a paradox, I was like, boom, that makes sense for me. It's another thing that like snaps into place for me. And I just loved it. So I'm so glad we got to talk about it. But I'm like right on the end of time. I've got to go make sure my kid's okay. But
yeah, you're good. I like a comment that someone said about using the yellow rock to find lemonade, but maybe you don't want to find lemonade. You just need to find some coconut water and use the coconut instead. You know,
Perfect.
And that's the thing. That's what I love about ADHD is we are so solution based, and there's so many different ways that we can do things.
Well,
and, like
Malcolm Gladwell talks about you give a kid a brick and you say, what are all the things you can do with a brick, right?
Yeah.
Most people are like, well, you can use it as a paperweight or whatever, but the more creative that you can get with a brick, the stronger the outlook for your life is, right? Because you can come up with creative solutions like that.
So for ADHD, our brick is a yellow painted rock.
Yes, I love it. Beautiful. I'm gonna have to cut it off there, but thank you so much, Michael, for coming on. Like, super amazing. Real quick, tell people where they can find you, all the platforms and stuff.
You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and if you have Discord, you can find me in Discord, the Yellow Rock Brigade Discord. And I'm also a coach, so if you need coaching services or you just want a consultation or anything like that, you can schedule one of those with me as well.
Great. As usual, I will be back next week, same or normal time slot. We were a little bit late this time. Thank you all for joining. You can catch replays and clips in YouTube, and we'll be back next week. Thank you so much again, Michael. Like, seriously, fantastic conversation. Like,